That one back there.
Great. There we go. You guys, welcome to Ignite for Friday. We have our instructor, Sarah Braegger. Is I say your last name, Sarah?
Yeah,
okay.
Yep.
And this is her first time teaching Ignite, but she's been an agent here for how long?
I've been with the team in here like almost a year and a half.
Almost a year and a half. And she is killing it. She's doing awesome. She's on the Fields team. And so we like to have the instructors kind of give a little bit about them, a bio about themselves, how they got into real estate, why they got into real estate, just, you know, kind of little few things about you, so we can kind of connect with you like on a personal level. So, you know, especially our new agents who come, they know that, you know, it's hard work but it's possible and they can get there, and hopefully relate to some of our instructors who are, you know, successful and doing really, really well, that know that they can be there too. So we'll have you just take a few minutes and introduce yourself. But no, Sarah's awesome. She jumped in and was willing to just go forward, and we just appreciate her being willing to teach. So we've got some Zoomers on. The slideshow's up and ready. So just remember, if you're a Zoomer, just unmute yourself if you do have a question. And then in the audience, I'll give you guys the mics and you guys can ask away. So, okay, I'll turn the time over to Sarah.
Thanks, Sid. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you guys on Zoom here? I want to make sure that you guys can hear really well, because I know on Zoom calls it can be difficult. Okay, so a bio about me. Great. So I've been, like Sid said, I've been here for about a year and a half. I was actually in restaurants before I got into real estate. For my whole career, my whole life has been in restaurants. And I owned a restaurant when we decided to close it down. It was called Blue Street Barbecue in American Fork. I had it for 3 years. We actually had a fire there. And so we decided to shut it after the fire, and it was a good opportunity for me to start fresh. And real estate was something that just excited me and I was interested in, because I like people and I love being around people, but I had had a staff for a long time and had been dealing with management, and I wanted to try something new. Real estate was just an exciting opportunity to try something fresh, and I got into school and realized it was something I was really excited about. So that's kind of how I got there. I'm from Minnesota originally, live here now, grew up in Cedar Hills, moved here when I was in 6th grade. And I have one son who's 12 and 5'4" and taller than me. And I think really that's all the exciting stuff about me. I don't know how much. So almost 2 years. So still pretty new, but when I joined with the Fields team, it was an excellent way to get a lot of training and have a lot of interaction with people and get a lot of leads. So it's been a really exciting and successful first 2 years. So, yeah.
With leads, I just got a funny question.
Yeah.
How much of your guys' leads are from ads? Because I see your ads everywhere.
That is a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, but the director of marketing on my team would, or the director of operations, so you can find out. But I just take the calls. I don't care where they come from. I'm just happy to have them. So, yeah. Any other questions?
What's kind of your advice for newer agents?
So my advice for newer agents is just tough it out, ride it out. Expect that it's going to be difficult, and be excited when it's not. Be happy when it's not. Expect that things will be challenging, because they will be. And if you don't set that expectation for yourself, knowing that you can get through it, if you stay focused and you do the work that's required, it will pay off. It is a rough start. It is hard to get into real estate without a lot of support. So lean on those that will help you. Use your resources, training at the office, or however you can get them. There's lots of trainings online. And ask a lot of questions. That's seriously very important. Don't be scared to ask questions, especially when you're in a contract, your first couple of contracts. You have a big question, you're not sure, you're a little nervous. Don't take the risk of not knowing the answer for sure. So use your resources and get the help you need. You have a question? That's okay. Yeah, no problem. Anything else?
I mean, I know you've only been in it for 2 years, but would you say once you get past that first year, things start to get a little easier?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like coming into my second year, I mean, I had a good first year in the sense that I had a lot of support and a lot of team support. But coming into my second year, I feel completely different. Even only in your second year, you feel like a veteran in real estate, and I'm sure it just gets better. So yes, It does. It takes a little bit of time, but it gets easier and it gets more comfortable. So good question. All right, are we ready to start? Was that enough bio about me? Was that interesting enough? Okay. All right, cool. So we're going to talk about negotiating the deal today. I actually found this material really helpful and interesting, even though, you know, I have some experience doing it. I found it to be really fascinating, so I'm excited about some of the stuff we're going to talk about. And I'm going to work this at the same time as trying to talk, so we'll see how that goes. The most important thing today to take away, you know, what they really want us to learn from all of this is how to negotiate professionally and what the 3 points, or what they call the 3 Ps of negotiating are. So right on here, let's see. I'll try and read as much as I can, but I'll ask you guys to read too if you don't mind. So negotiating, I thought this was a really interesting point. And here it says that you're always negotiating in life. Like you're negotiating things even when you don't realize you are, which was really very true. Like you're negotiating with your 12-year-old to get dressed in the morning. You're negotiating with friends, what time you're going to meet up. You're negotiating with your family on who's going to take mom to the doctor. It's, you know, there's always different things that you're negotiating in life without even realizing it. So it's important to understand how to get what you want out of the negotiation. So on here it says when there's something you want, a new car for the price you want to pay, for your friend to see the point of view in an argument, or for your child to do the dishes, the truth is that whatever you want is often owned or controlled by someone else. The way to get what you want is through negotiation. So bargaining, understanding what bargaining is a give and take process between 2 or more parties with its own aims, needs, and viewpoints, seeking to discover common ground and reach an agreement to settle a matter of mutual concern or resolve conflict. That is exactly what you do in real estate. That's almost everything that we do. Only thing that we do is give and take between 2 parties to get them to a resolution that works for everybody. And so we're going to kind of talk and figure out how the best ways to do that are. I can figure out this mouse. Okay. So I thought this is really interesting as well. Again, going back to we're always negotiating. So there's more negotiation than just you and the other agent in a contract. You are negotiating with your buyer, your client, or your seller. As soon as you take that client on, sometimes even before, you're negotiating several different things with them, helping them to understand the process. And there are specific things that you can negotiate, like timelines and buyer broker agreements. There's also, I mean, what else do you negotiate with your clients when you take them on? It's the most important thing to you in a contract at the end of the day. Yeah, you negotiate your commission. So part of knowing how to get what you want out of that negotiation with your client is knowing your value and your worth and being confident in what you offer, which is something we'll get into in just a little bit here. But I thought that was a really interesting point, that you're negotiating with your client as well. And that doesn't just mean at the beginning of the contract. That's when you're under contract as well. I mean, there's plenty of times that you're going to be working with your client to help them understand, especially when there's a hiccup or a bump in the road that they're not happy about. You do have to negotiate and work through that with them as well before you can even take it to the other side. So try and see the entire contract as a negotiation, and you're at the center of it for everyone. So, okay. We're going to skip the video part because apparently they were filmed in like 1938. Okay. Pretty outdated. Okay, so some negotiating tips. If it's okay, let's go around the room and read off if you don't mind. You want to start right here in the front? I'm sorry, what was your name? Tristan, that's right. I won't forget. Okay, the first one right there. I know it's a very short statement, but I think this is the most important thing that it says in this whole list. And the reason why is the way that you present yourself and how professional you are will dictate the tone of your contract. And I've worked with agents, I'm sure all of us have, or all of you will at some point, where you feel like they're not professional, and it does change the tone of the contract and how things work. It takes what should be a smooth contract and turns it into a difficult one. So being professional obviously means several different things, but we do a lot of negotiation in real estate nowadays on the phone, over the phone, sometimes over text, which you should definitely be careful of. And so staying professional in that mode when you're on the phone, just remember how you're speaking, to whom you're speaking, and what your goal is, which is the next bullet point right here. If you don't mind reading that. Oh yeah, I forgot.
Remember your goal, a signed contract. This is what you're driving toward, and it's what both agents and their clients have in mind.
This one, remembering your goal is to have that signed contract, is probably one of the most common things I have to remind myself when I'm in a deal that I feel is difficult, or even not necessarily, but your goal for the other agent as well, and technically for your clients, is to have that signed contract stay and remain in place. It's what your job is as a professional, is to help that happen. And there's going to be times when you have to set aside things that you think, things that you want, and make your client the most important, which gets them the signed contract and gets them the home that they need or gets it sold. Do you mind reading the next bullet point back there? Do you mind handing him that microphone? Since we've got Zoom people, yeah, if you'll just talk into it. Thank you.
Control what you say to anyone involved in the transaction. If you create anxiety in your client or other parties, you are reducing their leverage in negotiations.
So I think that kind of just goes back to the first bullet point about being professional. Thank you. Control what you say to everyone involved in the transaction. Remember where your professional boundaries are. Remember where you need to stand. We're giving them your advice based on your experience and what you see in the market. And just remember that what you say will, again, control or dictate the tone of the contract. So keep it positive and keep it clear and to the point. Continually refer back to motivation. Remind your client why they want to buy or sell and help them reevaluate their requests if they're becoming unreasonable. How many times does that happen in contracts? I know on Zoom you probably can't raise your hand, but I know you are. Motivation is going to help your clients stay focused and help you help them get to their goal. Oftentimes, contracts are a highly emotional thing. People are buying or selling a home based on a circumstance in their life, like divorce or downsizing the home that they raised their family in, or they're buying their first home. It's a highly emotional transaction. And so keeping them focused on that motivation will help you keep that contract smooth. Don't reveal too much, listen more than talk, and keep your client's motivation close to your chest. I think that's listen more than talk is really important, especially at the beginning of the contract when you're making an offer, especially in a market like this. It's important the whole way through, of course, but Stephen Covey said something that I really love and I remember all the time, remind myself, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So get the other party, and that might mean your client, and that might mean the other party, understand what they need, what their goal is in their mind, and help them figure out how to work towards that. Present solutions that will give them the answers to what they need, and listen first. Don't just go on talking about your experience or a story that happened sometime or an example. Understand where they're coming from. That helps a lot when I had mentioned making an offer, always reaching out to the other agent before you make an offer, especially in this market. That's something that I always do. Hopefully try and get them by phone. If not, if you can't reach them and you're in, you have to have an offer submitted in an hour, at least make contact in a text or an email. But understand where the other agent is coming from, ask them what their client's needs are, and then take that back to your client and tailor it so that it fits that seller or the buyer from the get-go. And then the last one, which I thought was very, very important. Tristan, do you mind reading that? Can we go back to you? Yeah, do you mind I'm talking into the mic, thanks.
Continually refer back to motivation. Remind your client.
The last bullet point.
Oh,
that was a good one, but
okay,
let's do the last one. Okay, thanks, Sid.
The don't be attached.
Yep. Yeah, the very last one.
Don't be attached to the outcome. You'll do hundreds of or thousands of transactions in your career, and there's no way you can get everything you and your clients want all the time. Don't let it affect your mindset if a deal doesn't go through or if your client doesn't act on your recommendation. Find a different win for your client.
Okay, this is super important to remember, especially as a new agent. Don't be attached to the outcome. Emotionally remove yourself from the high-pitched emotion sometimes that happens in a contract and just stay professional. Contracts get canceled, people pull out, financing doesn't go through. That happens a lot. I shouldn't say a lot, but it does happen. It will happen. You'll see it in your career. Don't let desperation as a new agent control the contract. Work from a position of doing what's best for your client, even if that means that they back out of the deal and you're frustrated, you have to start all over, or you lost all that work. That happens. That's a part of the game. Just rack it up into the time spent that when you finally get that commission paid off, you'll remember that it might've been difficult and maybe it changed a couple times or you had to make offers on several houses. It's going to happen. But remember that your goal is to get to the end if you can. And when you can't, you have to separate yourself from that emotion and don't let it control how you react with your client, or how you move forward with them. So any questions or thoughts from you guys in the audience? Yeah.
Can you share a couple examples of things not going exactly the way you planned, or not seeing the outcome that you
Sure.
planned, either your client's outcome or your expectations?
Sure. Yeah, a couple of examples of things not going the way that you want them to, right? Okay, so I have clients, they're actually closing on their home today, which is great. But 2 months ago, we made an offer in a highly multiple offer situation. We came out on top, we went under contract, and within 2 days, I want to say, she called me up, my buyer called me up and said, I just don't see myself loving this house for 30 years. And I just don't think that I'm in it. And you're in a position at that point as the agent to do one of two things. And I hope you don't do what some agents might do, which is try and push them to stay in that home. Well, this home is great. It's got a great yard. It has everything you asked for. You're going to love this place. It has enough room for your kids. It's the only thing available in this price range. Some people are going to want to use that desperation and be attached to the outcome and get their client to stay in it. And that's not what's doing best for your client. That's not acting in their best interest, and it's not being their advocate. So my conversation with her was, why don't we talk about that a little bit? Tell me what you think you don't love about the home. And I made some notes, and we withdrew from the contract, which is always a hard call. You have to send a notice of cancellation. And I always call the agent, talk to them, and just said, hey, they're deciding to back out. Good luck. I hope it goes smoothly. And from the things that she was able to tell me about that home, I actually was able to narrow down better for them what they wanted in their next house, because we had seen in person what they thought they wanted versus what they actually needed. So that's one example. And that does happen, from time to time, that they'll just back out emotionally. People get cold feet, buyer's remorse really quick. If it happens, it usually happens within those first couple days. So another example, probably financing is going to be the next best one. I mean, it's really important to vet your clients to make sure that they're pre-approved. When you get a client and they have a pre-approval letter, talk to that lender, reach out to them. You're going to be working with the lender and your client the entire contract. So there's nothing wrong with reaching out and getting a good feel. If the lender gives you any indication that they're unsure, you might want to have some conversations with your client to make sure that they actually are qualified and ready to move forward. Because people do pull out because of financing. They don't get the commission that they expected that they were going to use for a down payment at the end of the contract, or they didn't understand. I had a client, no joke, like just a little while back, who asked me if he could use a line of credit for his down payment. And he was thinking, he was pre-qualified. And in his mind, he thought that it would be a reasonable thing to use like a credit card to make a down payment. And so that transaction did not happen. Does that give you some good ideas? Okay, perfect. Yeah, I don't want to scare you.
Just
Go
as
ahead,
me
Tristan.
being a new agent, I kind of hopped on it early and just signed like a year-long buyer broker, and then got them pre-qualified. But turns out they need to build their credit a little more. And in the meeting, they're like, "Oh, the girl who has a good credit score was like, I could use my credit cards to pay off his debts." And like, we had to really sit down with them and be like, "Hey, this is the plan if you guys want to buy a house in the next couple of months."
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably very reasonable to assume that if they're in enough debt or their credit score is low enough that they can't really qualify for a loan, that they probably don't have the best financial skills. And so they might come from a place of thinking that you can pay off a credit card with, whatever example you just used, or that you can use your credit card to pay your earnest money even. That will happen. So pay attention to those flags up front for sure. And just remember, like, we have a lot of experience working with loan officers and financing in the real estate business, but you're not a financial advisor. So loop that lender in and make sure that everyone's on the same page as to what their game plan needs to be so that they're qualified with that lender. Does that make sense? Yeah, go ahead.
I did some showings for some first-time home buyers yesterday too, and their like spectrum is so like crazy, like it's not narrowed down at all. And so we went and looked at two that needed help, but one of them was built in 1871. And everything about it was so weird. It was just like a waste of time, basically.
Yeah, it can definitely feel that way, but I would take every experience, especially as a new agent, when you're showing homes or working a deal, never consider anything a waste of time in the sense, I understand what you're saying, like my time from 12 to 1 was wasted, but it's not a waste of time if you have something to take away from it. And what you can take away with that client was, well, now we're going to rule out homes that were built in 1920 and before, because they don't like this and that about it. You're always going to have, everyone's going to get a client every once in a while that's like, okay, here's what I want. I want a home from anywhere from Salt Lake to Payson in the 300 to 400,000 price range. I need 6 or 4 bedrooms. Like, you're going to get that client that really doesn't know what they want, or they have way too broad of what they think. And so in order to best use your time, give them as many solutions and options to finding what those things might be, whether it's sending them online listings or getting really specific on your search and sending them very specific listings that you think would apply, and then listen to their feedback. If they're not baiting on any of the listings that you're showing them, even emailing them, then you're not in the right direction. So just redirect yourself to continue narrowing it down. But that's hard, and you'll get that a lot. All right, anyone else? Any other comments? Thank you, Tristan. That's awesome. Good luck. First-time home buyers are exciting too, because you'll be learning with them. Okay.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Did we get a Zoom comment?
Yes. Sarah?
Yes.
Hi, this is Spencer Bassett. I'm coming in from Zoom. Just want to make sure I'm at the right class with negotiation.
Yep, that's this class.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks. Hey, Tristan, congratulations on the approval for your client.
Thank you. If you do have a Zoom comment, if you would just speak up as loud as you can. I don't know if we can turn it up in here, but the speaker sounds pretty low. So I would love and appreciate commentary from you guys on there too. It's really helpful. Let's see if that, okay, we'll see. All right, common points negotiating. If you guys don't mind participating again, Tristan, will you just read one and then we'll just go that way?
Price while the sales price is the primary factor in negotiations, it is not necessarily the bottom line. In a situation where a seller receives multiple offers at the same price, it is the terms of those offers in addition to the buyer's financial position that will determine which one wins.
So this is huge right now in the kind of market that we're in the really hot market with multiple offers on almost every property. We all know that price is the primary driving factor for what people want when they're selling their property. However, it's not always reasonable, and it's not always the best thing to do to just focus on the price. There are other terms, which we'll get into next, which are very important to the contract. And if you are not in a position, say you've got a client pre-approved at 340 and the home is listed at exactly 340 and there's multiple offers, what do you do from there? And that's kind of what we'll get into a little bit in some situations on the next pages. But you have to know what other terms are important, and you have to know how to relay that to the other agent so that they understand that your client is strong in many other ways besides just price. So that'll come up a lot. Go ahead with the next one.
Okay, terms. The terms of an offer may be financial or time-based or both. When the buyer and seller can't agree on a sales price, the following 5 offer terms come into play.
Okay, so the next 5 points are basically things that they're suggesting can be negotiated to help support your price point. So we'll just keep going around if you don't mind reading closing costs.
Closing costs. Traditionally paid by the buyer, closing costs are in addition to the purchase price. Securing the cash to pay these expenses can be difficult for some, especially for first-time home buyers. Therefore, the seller may be asked to pay a portion of the closing costs. When you represent a seller, make your client aware that it's common for buyers to ask for part of the closing costs to be conveyed by them and what their opinions are. What their options are.
Awesome. Closing costs, even 6 months ago, a year ago, it was very common for buyers to get some concessions or have some closing costs paid. It's a lot more difficult right now because sellers have so many options that they're not going to likely choose an offer where they have to net less because they're providing something for the buyer, Right. But if you do have a buyer, I will just comment that in this market particularly, since we're not really in a great buyer's position right now, if you've got a client that is a first-time home buyer, they don't have closing costs up front, or they don't have a lot of cash out of pocket, if they're pre-approved at 340, don't max out their budget at 340. Don't take them to look at homes that are 340, 345. Keep them in that lower range so that you can negotiate terms if you need to. So don't stress them out. That's only going to put you in a situation where you're bidding on properties and spending a lot of time that you're likely not going to get, because even if they do accept your offer, your buyers cannot complete the terms of that. You have a question?
Yeah. Do you think, like, I know the market's crazy right now, but do you think it will slow down at all in the winter?
That's a good question. I mean, I would assume so based on the trends that we normally see. I mean, in the state of Utah, nobody wants to move in 0-degree weather with ice, right? But it's an unpredictable market right now, I will say. If interest rates are going to stay low like they are right now, it's possible we'll still see as many buyers. We're seeing less listings right now, so there's less sellers. And I think as that gets closer to the holidays, less people are driven to sell during that time period. So we're probably going to continue to see a lack of listings that we need, or a decrease, which will change the tone for the buyers. So
Okay. And then there's just like a question, because my clients, once they get pre-approved, they probably won't have too much to put in as a down payment.
Mhm.
So would you just say try and not max out their budget, so we can put like an escalation clause or something in it?
yeah, I mean, definitely don't max out their budget for any client, really. I mean, you don't want to put someone in a position where they're at the max of their financial strength, and that's going to present a lot of other stressful situations when you're under contract, because money is the bottom line. And so if they're struggling with even being at their max at the get-go, just really pay attention to that. Keep them in that lower price range. Also work with the lender. Look at different programs like FHA, where there's lower down payments, or USDA, where there's 0 down payment if they're in areas like Saratoga Springs, Eagle Mountain, Payson, and South. So present those options to your client and say, you know, if you don't have a lot for a down payment, or you're going to need that for closing costs, or you just want to keep that money in your pocket, let's look at these other loan options. Just work with the lender and get some suggestions on how they can do that the best way.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
This is a newbie question. Sorry, I asked so many in the team chat, and I'm apologizing up front.
Oh, that's okay. Who are you?
Sam.
Hey, Sam. It's like someone's talking to you from a spaceship when you're in here. Huh? It's really weird. You don't know where the sound's coming from. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm working with someone as well that is like a first-time home buyer, and they don't have a lot of cash on hand. So when you like write offers, can they wrap their closing costs into the loan if you don't max out their budget, or not? Or does that have to be cash?
You can, yeah, you can. So again, back when we had sort of a slightly different temperature in the market, but you know, it's very common for the first-time homebuyers to need some contributions or some concessions. So you can, yeah, wrap that into the loan. If you're not maxing out their budget, you can offer over asking, and then ask for that concession to come back to your seller or your buyer in the form of closing costs. That was really a pretty common tactic. If they need $5,000 in closing costs, be very careful at how much you offer over asking, because if the home doesn't appraise at that asking price and you're going to have to drop back down, then your client's going to be stuck without that contribution or concessions possibly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes. So you can work it into the loan. Yeah, absolutely. And again, when you're working with a particular client, stay in touch with that lender constantly about what their options are and how you can help them do it the best way for them. I don't want to say the cheapest way, but the most financially sensible way for them. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Okay. Closing date, is that what we're on right here? Yes. Okay. I'll just read this one. When the seller has a specific time frame for moving, the buyer has the upper hand and can leverage this by being more flexible with the closing date and less flexible with the offer price. I mean, what they're saying there in that position is if the seller has motivated timelines, like for example, they're taking a job out of state and they don't have an option to have to sell their home and move, and they realize that then they'll be faced with 2 mortgage payments, possibly, you know, things that they're going to want to avoid. The buyer then would have the leverage to say, hey, I'll pay $5,000 under your asking price, but I will get it done in this amount of time so you can be out of your property. I think what we're seeing more right now on the flip side of that is that sellers obviously have the upper hand. So we're seeing a lot of buyers giving the sellers their gracious timeline. When would you like to be out of your home? Do you need delayed possession, or do you need a flexible settlement date, which are tools that you can use and are pretty common right now, actually. And if you're not familiar with how to do that, then definitely talk to someone or ask, and you're welcome to ask me how to work around those things. The flexible settlement date is actually an addendum that I really like. I've used it a couple times, and it's really great. What it does is it gives a span of time that the closing can happen in, and then you have to give notice within 5 days, I think it is, of when that closing is going to be. So in what scenario would that be helpful to have a flexible closing date? If you're representing the seller, for example. Yeah, so if your seller needs to close out on their home in order to buy their next home, having a flexible settlement or a couple of days can really make that transition smooth with the transfers of money and the lender. That's a perfect example.
Are
Yes.
you saying to put that into the contract that the closing date would be flexible?
Yes, it's an addendum. So you can put that in as part of the REPC, as part of your offer.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have an example. I have a listing coming up, and they're trying to avoid capital gains.
Okay.
And that will happen in November.
Okay.
So would it be similar thing, or do I just write the contract date as the closing date as their, say it's the 21st of November?
That's my birthday.
Oh, happy
You should
birthday.
do that. That's a good question. That I think would be something I think would be beneficial for you to talk to the lender more about. You can do a flexible settlement. You could also just do delayed possessions, or I would give them the benefit of time actually, and write it for a little bit longer rather than, and you can always extend and ask for extensions if you need to.
Okay.
That's a pretty specific example. So I can put together some thoughts maybe and get with you about that. But
that'd be great.
you could use it for that for sure. You can use it for any benefit. I mean, it's really tricky when people are buying and selling at the same time, right? And so having some flexibility in what day they actually have to be out of the property helps both sides a lot. And it makes your offer really strong if the seller has a specific requirement, and you as your buyers, with your buyers, you can say, we'll work around your timeline to make you comfortable. That's going to be one of those really great terms that they're going to know is just as important to them as price, right? So I hope that answers your question. I feel like I went skiing a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Conveyances. So this one I don't see a whole lot of, but this would be like if there was personal property that was going to be sold or that the buyer wants to keep in the home, like specific furniture or something that's artwork, or there's plenty of examples. Chandeliers, I know that's come up before. So conveyances are defined by the locality's Board of Realtors. So here in Utah, the general rule of thumb is that attached fixtures stay with the home, and non-realty items or personal property like furniture or anything that's not attached. So when it says attached fixtures, anything that's on the wall that's screwed into the wall, or a light fixture, a curtain rod, stuff that has to be there in order for that part of the house to work, like a light fixture, has to stay with the property. So if there's above and beyond additional things that, like a good example, I had some buyers buy a home last year in Lehigh that had a theater room in the basement. And they had a really awesome leather couch set that had like the recliners and everything like that. And they really wanted that couch. And so we asked for that couch to stay, and then we worked out a separate price with the seller, who probably reasonably couldn't take it to their next property, but we conveyed that as you'll have to do a separate bill of sale for personal property. And I don't see this term come up a lot, but if it does, you're working with something that's a little unique. So just make sure you're understanding how to do that properly. Like with a bill of sale, it might be a benefit to one party or the other, but I don't really see this as very common in negotiation tactics right now. If anyone else has a different experience, please feel free to chip in. But
I have a question on
Yeah.
this. Yeah. So I heard a story of someone whose home had this like beautiful chandelier in the dining room, and they wanted it, and the agent said, well, yeah, it's a fixture because it's attached, it'll still be here. But then when they went to move in, it was gone, and the sellers had switched it out. So do you have to be really specific about the fixtures and saying They can't be swapped out. It has to be the exact ones that were in the home when they wrote the offer.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Did you have a comment first?
It may not be under contract, but I remember reading this. As soon as you go under contract, by law, the house has to stay as it was.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the condition has to stay the same. I mean, that's why we do final walkthroughs with our clients and stuff. But that's a super good question. And I've heard the same story. So either it's like a story that people use to scare realtors, or it really happened to someone and everyone knows about it. But in that example, yes, that is a fixture, and legally it was supposed to stay. So if it was my client and that chandelier was super important for whatever reason, even just that it was aesthetically nice, if your seller, when you're doing a walkthrough of their property and you're going to sign the contract with them to list their property, ask if there's anything important. And if there is, they need to remove that before you list it even. Take it down and replace it with something else. We run into the same thing with like TV mounts a lot, or Nest, those, alarm systems. If there's something that they want to hang on to that's technically affixed and should be sold with it, have them remove that before you're even showing the home. Because as soon as a buyer walks through, if your seller doesn't have that removed and they get emotionally attached to something in that house, as soon as it's sold and completed, they own it. And so, yeah, stuff like that does actually get into litigation and can go really ugly. So yeah, I would say absolutely talk to your sellers. And then if you're in a situation where you're representing the buyer, maybe people have oversight, they miss things sometimes. Just be very clear and specific if there's something like that, and always get that up front and then get it in writing. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Just a funny example. We have a neighbor who he died and the family was selling the house.
Okay.
And he had
It's very funny.
That's not the funny part. An old fashioned like outhouse in the backyard.
Okay.
And they the people who were buying just really wanted it. And they're like, if it's not there, we're not going to buy it. And the family wanted it, so it didn't work out. But
yeah,
kind of a funny example.
That is a very weird, funny story. I don't know if everyone heard that, but they wanted to buy an outhouse that came with the house. In that case, that is personal property. It's not real estate, so it wouldn't have been included in the sale technically, but that is a very unique story. I like that one better than the chandelier story. Any other questions? Cool. Okay, earnest money and option fee. It's in the seller's best interest for your buyer to put as much escrow as possible, as soon as possible. While locality's Board of Realtors has a standard practice for when earnest money or the option fee is applicable and deposited, the amount is often negotiated. I don't particularly see a lot of negotiation when it comes to the amount of earnest money, but it is important to make sure your client understands that the more earnest money they're willing to put down, the stronger their offer will look, because it shows that they're financially invested in this and they've got more skin in the game. So does anyone have any questions about that? And do you guys know when it says locality Board of Realtors, which is very wordy, but Utah, requires the earnest money to be deposited?
4 days after the offer goes in?
After acceptance.
After acceptance, yeah.
Yep, after acceptance. Yep, 4 calendar days.
It makes a good point that you need, the more you put in, the more serious your offer seems. Mm-hmm. But don't you also need to be cautious that not to, with different clauses or whatever, that you don't squander the money, that it doesn't just that the sellers don't take the money,
the earnest money?
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. So in the contract, and it depends on how you write it, because there's different ways to write it, and right now we're seeing different techniques used with earnest money. Some agents are recommending to their clients that they make certain amounts, and we do this frequently in my team. We talk about it a lot, making certain parts of the earnest money non-refundable upon acceptance or upon a certain deadline, which again strengthens your offer because it gives the indication that your client is all in. They're not going to back out, and they do have the financial strength to make the contract actually complete. And so, yes, you do have to be very careful. And I would say, especially as a new agent, get that rep C and highlight and read through all of the sections that talk about earnest money and the deadlines for that, and know exactly what you're up against. So typically what we most commonly see is that earnest money only gets fully released to the seller if your buyer cancels after the finance and appraisal deadline. Although there are different ways to write that. You can do it after due diligence if you want to tighten up your timelines and make it look really strong. There are certain things you can do. But especially as a new agent, I think the best answer to your question is have every date, when you have a new contract, have every date written out and check on your dates every day to make sure you know exactly when your client's earnest money is going to go one way or the other.
And then we've had a few different Ignite instructors say different things about earnest money. Do you have like your own personal policy about a percentage that you recommend or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to get a different, not always, but you're going to get different opinions from different realtors. For sure that happens. We typically see about 1%. And that varies one way or the other. Last year when I was writing offers for even first-time home buyers, it wasn't 1%, it was maybe 0.5%. And the sellers didn't care as much as they do right now or might right now. No, not as a commission, as earnest money. Yeah. So we typically see about 1%. You can put down as much as your client wants to put down, as long as they understand the risk involved with that. But I think the good baseline is anywhere between 0.5% and 1% right now. Given that it's a seller's market, you're going to want to be as strong as possible. And earnest money does show strength. So just kind of have to go contract by contract. Does that help? Okay, cool. Yeah, absolutely. All right, repairs. So this is one that's going to come up a lot. You're going to deal with in every contract. This can be the biggest headache in a contract, and it can also be the fork in the road where either your contract keeps going or you go separate ways. So repairs. So most offers are often contingent on the outcome of the home inspection and necessary repairs. Depending on the complexity of repairs, buyers may ask the seller to make repairs prior to closing, subject to a follow-up inspection, or deduct the repair cost from the sales price or pay a lump sum at closing. So it's giving you a couple different options. When you have an inspection, which you should always have your inspection done and done by a professional, they're going to come back with feedback about the property. You're going to take a look at that. You're going to let your client read over it and decide what's important to them as far as repairs go. I'm always very careful. I don't make suggestions in the get-go unless they're like glaring red flags. I let them come to me with what they're concerned about and then work with those specific concerns. Because is that for your seller or your buyer? For a buyer. Yeah, I mean, and you'll do that on the flip side with your seller as well. But when you're dealing with your buyer and you're dealing with repairs, that's more, I think, what the situation is directing to. But so a couple of different options. You can ask for repairs to be made. I've got a contract right now where the buyers came to us, I represent the seller, with a list of like 12 repairs. That gets really particular and really picky, and it can make the contract difficult for a couple different reasons. And it can delay the time, it can delay the contract. Also, a professional or an appraiser, most likely when you're working with a lender, is gonna have to come back and check and make sure that all those repairs were completed because it's a part of the contract. They're contractually obligated to make those repairs. So it can delay things for sure. If it's a very important repair, like a roof, that's something that you're going to have to just deal with head on and negotiate one way or the other. As representing the buyer, the good thing about having all of that information when you're negotiating with the listing agent is that now that information that they found on the inspection report that you're requesting it needs to be fixed. The seller, if they refuse and your buyer backs out of the contract, the seller has to then edit their seller property disclosures and add all of those things to it. So when you've got your seller's property condition disclosures and you're going over them with your seller, they have to write and answer questions about the condition of their home, right? If things come back on the inspection that they did not know about, like a 22-year-old roof that needs replacements in 4 different places. I mean, how often are you on your roof? That comes back. Now they have to disclose that to the next party. And so in terms of negotiating, you do have the upper hand in asking for those things to be done because the seller is going to have to likely deal with that with their next buyer and have to put those things on that property disclosure form. So that's one way to do it, is to ask for those repairs to be done. Some buyers want the repairs to be done because they don't want to do them themselves. Other people would prefer to just take a reduction in purchase price, which is the easier, cleaner way to do it, but not always best. So instead, in that scenario, I would say in negotiating with the listing agent, hey, here's all of the things, and find as many as you can. Here's all of the red flags on the inspection report. Take a look at all of this, because instead of putting everyone through doing all these repairs, we're going to ask for $3,000 off the asking price instead, and make that be the benefit to your buyer, right? Because you're negotiating for what is best for your client, but you're also negotiating for what they're their best financial position should be. So use that to your advantage. Hey, I've got a list of 20 things that came back on the inspection. Instead of doing that, let's just knock $5,000 off the price and call it even. And a lot of people will take that route because it's much easier than being a seller and having to deal with, X amount of repairs while you're moving. So it just depends. Yeah, go ahead.
So with the inspection and the appraisal, is it true that if a house only appraises, like let's say you offer, I don't know, 360 and it only appraises for 340, will the lender still approve the loan for 360?
No. So the lender,
Okay.
the appraiser works with the lender for the lender, not
Right.
for them. But what they're doing is the appraiser is giving the lender their recommendation on what the value is worth. And then the lender uses that to back up, hey, we're not going to offer, or we're not going to lend more on this property because this is the value of it.
And does the appraiser look at all the things that the inspector found, and like, does that play into it, or is it
so
separate?
they won't look at an inspection report necessarily, but they could catch things with their own eyes. I mean,
Mhm.
their job is to evaluate the home closely, and so they
Mhm.
do definitely find things that could show up on both reports. They do look at the condition and the quality of the home, and then they look at the sold comps and other properties in the area that sold that are similar, and that's where they get the bulk of their data. So
Okay.
yeah.
So I guess like with like a new roof, right? Like would an appraiser take that into
Mhm.
account? Okay.
Yeah.
So do you find often then that like they'll have a lot of things or repairs that need to be done, and maybe the repairs would only cost, I don't know, $5,000 to do, but the appraisal comes in way lower, so you would just say, accept the offer or accept the amount that the appraisers are saying?
So in your contract
makes sense.
timelines, your due diligence is always before your finance and appraisal. I guess I shouldn't say always because you can do it differently, but
Yeah.
typically and within the standard contract, it's going to be before. So you're not even going to know the appraisal until you've worked through your due diligence. That's why that due diligence period is, 10 days, 14 days. We typically see 14 days in not a so crazy market. So you have that time period to negotiate the asking price if you want to do that versus repairs. And that's when you do have the upper hand as the buyer, because we don't know what that appraised number is going to be yet. And so, yeah, then you get to the appraisal deadline and it comes back lower, and you're going to have to reevaluate. The seller could want to renegotiate or not want to renegotiate actually, but they could want to meet in the middle on the appraisal, the price. That does happen. But if you've negotiated for repairs already or a decrease, that's already contractually done, signed and agreed, and now you're on to your next deadline. So it'll depend case to case. But yeah, that's the general rule, is that all of that's going to be completed and agreed to before your appraiser comes out. So
I have a couple questions.
Please.
So in the listing I have coming up, there's another house on the next block over that's under contract now.
Mhm.
Is there a way for me to find out once the appraisal goes through what it appraised for?
you could call and ask, did it come in at appraisal? You could call the listing agent and ask, hey, did it come in close? They can't or shouldn't be revealing any terms of the contract. What will happen is, as soon as that finance and appraisal deadline is passed and then that house closes, you'll be able to see that on the MLS.
It'll show me what it appraised for.
It won't show you what it appraised for, but it'll show you what it settled for. Yeah, technically an appraisal belongs to the lender, and the lender tells the buyer what it appraised for.
Right.
So it depends on the cooperation of the other agent, if they're willing to tell you, if the buyers are willing to release that information. Just kind of depends.
So I can ask kind of just a broad question.
You
Hey,
can.
do you know if it appraised for asking
Yeah,
price?
you can ask a broad question for sure.
And
Hey,
then,
Sarah.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. He can finish, and then I'll say what I had to say.
no, you're good. Go for it.
So I had two occasions when the appraisal came in low. One as a listing agent, and one just barely on the one you were helping me write up a really good competitive offer for. And it applies to the question you were just asking. So we offered $235. The asking price was $225. So we were playing a game. She knew that they didn't have money to come in over appraisal. But what she did was she actually called the agent on the other house that she was watching that appraised higher, and the ask bid was selling higher. So our appraisal came in at $228, but she paid for a reappraisal and got it to $234.
Okay.
So she played the game back and was very smart.
Yes.
as a listing agent. So that was a good lesson for me. I mean, we both played the game and we both kind of won because we won the deal. But so that was that. But then on the other one, as the listing agent, you were saying you don't advise basically on repairs. This agent told that he showed me an email conversation he had with his client, but he had advised to ask for $12,000 in repairs, carpets and floors and all sorts of stuff. And he came back and said, well, I only feel comfortable with 9,000. So we negotiated through our due diligence, and then the appraisal came back in low. And my sellers were finally like, you know what, we're done negotiating. You've pushed me to the limit. And so we'll meet you at appraisal, but we're not conceding anything. So I don't know, the appraisal has kind of been the scary part for me.
It is, yeah, especially right now. I mean, even in the past couple of months, appraisals have been a little bit scary. When the market is as hot as it is right now, you do have a lot of agents out there that are talking to their clients that they're selling and saying, hey, well, prices are at this and they're going for higher and your home is better and we can raise it this high and I think we can get this much out of it. They're not always working from their best data, and they're not always working in their client's best interest in the sense that they want to give them a good, solid value. What they're aiming for is get the deal. So I'm gonna tell you that we can list it this high, and then it's just a crapshoot, right? So we do see that happen. That's when we're actually grateful for appraisers, because if they come in and give a different value to the home, they're actually keeping the market a little bit more controlled and not allowing that inflation, that false sense of value, because people are just throwing out crazy numbers right now. So that is a really good lesson, Sam. It's really a hard lesson too, but at the end of the day, the appraiser is going to tell you what it's worth, and it's up to both parties to decide. And again, like what you said, it was a win-win because you guys won the deal. And that goes back to the very first goal that we're talking about, is to keep that signed contract, get that contract completed, and work together. You do have to do that. And I'm sure it was a lot of back and forth with the agent. Well, you know, they've already agreed to pay X amount of, you know, 12,000 you said, or 9,000 or whatever, but now the appraisal's in low. It's going to be on your buyer at that point to say, what am I willing to give up to make this happen? Where am I willing to make concessions that have already been agreed to at that point? And that, you know, that comes down to, you can likely reevaluate what the dollar amount can be based on what the repairs are. I mean, you can talk to different professionals and get different estimates and quotes, and maybe help comfort your client that you can still get, or that they can still get repairs done or decent amount of work done, and not have to have such a large concession, and then maybe meet that seller in the middle a little bit. Does that make sense? Everyone? Okay. That was a really good comment, Sam. Thank you. Do you have a comment, Tristan?
Yeah. So if you run a CMA with experience, how close does the CMA go with an appraisal? Are they pretty close or no?
Depends on how good you are as an agent. Depends on how much research and time you put into it. CMAs, my team lead, Jared, I don't know if he's listening, will always say a CMA is a skill. It's an art form, he literally calls it. It's a skill that you have to develop, and you have to understand how appraisers will evaluate things as well, or how a seller will see things, a buyer. So yeah, you can pull data all day long, but you have to very carefully evaluate why you're using that for your benefit, why you're pulling that particular property, how it compares in your favor or in the other direction. So you really do have to spend a lot of time exercising that skill. Ask other agents for help as well in developing a good process for doing a CMA, and really understand. There's no way, sometimes with an appraisal, you're just throwing a dart at a board. There's no way to know for sure, especially since once you're under contract, things can come out in the inspection report and stuff like that. If you are really practicing your skill, you're getting advice from other agents, and you're putting together a solid valuation, yes, it should come into appraisal, or very close, right? That's the ideal goal, is to be able to provide that to your client confidently.
Yeah. So I'm going to be meeting with the FSBO, and they don't have, they've only marketed it on KSL. And so I'm going to meet with them and, you know, show what I can offer. But I ran a CMA, and they've listed theirs at like 440 something. And I ran a CMA, and it's popping up as 500. Would you promise someone? I mean, not necessarily promise, just because legal reasons.
You saw my face. Never promise anything in real estate.
But could you be like, hey, I could possibly get you more than what you have it listed at.
So honestly, in terms of providing your value and showing how skilled you are as an agent, first of all, yeah, don't promise anything, of course, but also be cautious on how much you tell them. Don't say, here, I ran all your numbers and I think your home's worth $500,000. I think we could get that. And they're like, great, thank you. Have a good day. They turn around and change their KSL listing to $500,000. You're giving information away for free. Yeah, I know you want that client for sure. And if FSBOs can be tricky because people who think or want to do it on their own are typically very emotionally attached to what they think the price of the home, the value of the home is. So what I would say in that circumstance, get a couple other opinions. And then I would say to them, I think that there's more value in the home that you're asking for, and we can get into that once we have an agreement where I'm here to help you, but I think that we've got a higher number here. And then work with them as they decide to sign you as their agent, because you've shown that you've got value and you've got data and research, but you're not going to give your time away for free. FSBOs, they don't want to pay agents. You could very likely convert the deal, and that could absolutely happen, but their whole mindset is to avoid that. So don't provide too much free information. Use your value. And like we said at the beginning, nothing is a waste of time. So even if they don't end up actually hiring you on and they go do their own thing, they're unlikely to be as successful as if they used an agent, but you still had an opportunity to learn how to address a FSBO or a difficult client. You could even call them that. Does that help? Okay. All right. For repairs, just a couple more notes. When you're dealing with a buyer, always set that expectation with your client and make sure that they are focusing on what's very important, what's really important, which is closing the home, getting to move in and have their family live there, versus I want XYZ minor repairs to be done because it should be done this way, right? So don't get lost in the small things. When it comes down to actually closing the home, there's going to be little things that are not going to make the biggest difference at the end of the day. Very simple repairs that can be done. Just don't get caught up, or counsel your client not to get caught up in the very small things. Look at big picture stuff. If it comes down to a faucet's leaky and the roof has 6 holes in it, don't deal with the faucet. You know what I mean? You focus on what's important. And especially when you're asking for repairs to be done or concessions to be made, you have to really carefully choose what you spend your time and your money on, right? So just don't get caught up in the small details. It is smoother to get a reduction in price. In my opinion, that's how I prefer to do it. But again, it's going to depend on your client. And then when you are negotiating for repairs or a deduction in cost, there is an addendum that not everybody uses. It's called the Resolution to Due Diligence Addendum. It's a separate addendum. Oftentimes agents, or even before that addendum was available, would just use a standard addendum to negotiate for repairs. What this due diligence one does is it very explicitly details and lists out what the repairs are going to be, but also how they need to be done, by whom, at what time, at what deadline. They have to be done by a contractor, right? Say that there's holes in the roof and the seller's like, no problem, I got it. I watched a YouTube video. I'm going to get up there and fix my roof. It'll be fine. If you write just a regular addendum that says roof must be repaired and you leave it ambiguous, you're putting your client in a position where they might not get those repairs completed and actually done correctly. So use that due diligence addendum to make sure, because it protects your buyer the best way by saying these repairs will be done by a professional X amount of time. You can use those deadlines to benefit your client. So make sure you're always doing the best and most detailed thing for your buyer. Okay. So the 3 Ps approach.
Sorry, one last question.
No, please. Yeah.
Can you be really specific and say, like, if I have someone who fixed my roof 5 years ago and I trust him, can you be specific and say, I want him to fix the roof? Or do you just have to go with a professional?
Technically, you can ask for anything you want, but it would be, I wouldn't necessarily ask for that. I think the best way to do that would be offer it. Maybe like, hey, I've got, you're representing the buyer in this case, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So, here's what we think the repairs are going to be. I've got a great roofer I've worked with before. If you'd like him to come out and give you guys a quote, he's done really good work. And then very likely the listing agent or the seller could say, yeah, let's give it a shot. But most sellers are going to want to get their own quotes from their own contractors or work with, they're not going to want to just take the advice of a flyby. But again, if you're working as a mediator between both parties and your goal is the win and you're working with that listing agent as a team, then yeah, you can get a lot more done that way and you can get things done easier. So absolutely good question. But yeah, you can ask for anything you want in real estate. I mean, you can ask for a unicorn with a property. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, but okay. So the 3 P's approach, prepare, present, and position. So starting with the first one, preparing. Let's talk, the first bullet is knowing your goal. So Tristan, will you mind kicking off and reading that?
Know your goal. Have a clear goal of reaching a win-win agreement in which both the buyer and seller are satisfied with the outcome of the negotiation. Remind your client of their motivation for moving or buying the house, and that when the contract closes, they'll be able to move on with their lives.
Very important. Obviously, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with motivation, reminding them what their motivation is, understanding what it is, because oftentimes that will take emotion out of it. You know, hey, my motivation is to get my home sold so I can sign my divorce papers, right? Then you're going to know that your client needs a lot of support in getting it done, but that their motivation is to just get it finished. So you can guide them and give them advice based on how to get it done quickly and get it over with. So knowing your goal for sure. Win-win, again, that goes back to making sure you're working with the listing agent or the buyer's agent, whichever you represent, that you're working together. Does anyone here like The Office? Watch The Office? You know that episode where Michael's like trying to come up with a win-win-win scenario? So win-win-win, win for buyer, win for seller, win for both agents. So win-win-win, that's always your goal. Know your client. I'll read this and make sure you fully understand your client's goals. Learn the areas in which they are willing to negotiate and where they will stand firm. That's a good thing to understand and get to know your client before you're taking them out or when you're first taking them out to see properties. Listen to what they say. Again, seek to understand. Listen to the comments that they make on certain things. You know, there's some people are very particular about how they want, I don't know what a good example is. A TV mounted, for example. I have a client right now who's under contract and they wanted speakers wired a certain way. So we had to talk about that. So listen to what they say and just take that into account so that you know when you are getting to the negotiating table that you already know where they're coming from and how to make that go quickly, right? Think ahead, anticipate what the other party wants out of the negotiation, write how you think they may counter the offer and how you plan to handle it. I wouldn't say let's anticipate what the other party wants. I'd say let's ask what the party wants right now with the temp of the market. Just ask, get as much information as you can up front. Okay, and then right here, do you mind reading set clear expectations?
Set clear expectations prior to meeting with the other party. Set clear and realistic expectations with your client, and then under promise and over deliver. Stress the importance of moving quickly to create a sense of urgency. Part of setting clear expectations with your client is being clear that win-lose agreements are likely to be rejected by the other side. To set yourself up for success, make it a win-win.
Absolutely. So setting clear expectations, I think, is very important with every client every time. I always have those conversations up front, setting expectations about, right now, for example, about how multiple offers are just pretty much what we're seeing on almost every property. So there's less of a bargaining power. I mean, talk with them and make sure that they understand what the process is like. Be very clear and upfront and ask them, do you have any questions? That's really important to just understand. Being clear that a win-lose agreement, are likely to be rejected by the other side, meaning a lot of people in real estate particularly, or in other positions, sales jobs or whatever, where you're negotiating things, think that you have to negotiate in order to get a good deal, or you're not getting a good deal if you're paying the full price or whatever it is. So just be upfront with your clients that situations when you're negotiating where one party loses out completely, it's not a good position to be in for anyone, and it doesn't likely happen. So help them just understand how to be in a win-win position as you're going into this. So the next one, be informed. Do you mind reading that right there?
Be informed. Before making an offer or counteroffer, it's good to practice to speak with 2 other agents. Ask open-ended questions and use active listening to find out as much as you can about the other party and their agent. This helps you know with whom you are negotiating, on what points you will negotiate, and where you and your client have leverage.
Kind of just a repeat of what we've been saying. Ask open-ended questions, use active listening, pay attention, seek to understand first. Next one, obey the laws. Just basically says every state or every locality has different Zoning laws, mortgage qualifications, make sure you know exactly what they are and how to help your client with them. Last one, know your documents inside and out. Make sure you understand the contract, especially as a new agent. Read that rep sheet constantly over and over again. Read sections, write notes to yourself. I mean, you are representing someone and you are giving them advice on a huge, major turning point in their life and with a huge purchase. You want to make sure you know what you're doing, because it will come back on you if you don't do your diligence. So make sure you understand your contract as you're going into it, for sure. Okay. So this is going into some scenarios and role playing, which we love to do. So we'll just go over like one of these scenarios instead of all of them, because we're getting close on time. So in this scenario right here, you are representing a single buyer. Your client is renting her present property. Like any first-time buyer, she is looking to you to guide her through the process. The asking price for the home she really loves is $175,000. So in Utah, you could buy like a roof with no house for that. The house appears to have evidence of a roof leak and is listed as is and is correctly priced. Your client would like to keep her payments as low as possible since she still has a number of student loans to pay off. She wants to write an offer of $155,000. There's been quite a bit of activity on the listing. This is actually a pretty good scenario for right now what's going on. There's been a lot of activity on listings and different properties. So going into it, and let's just throw back a couple ideas. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on role playing because it's really hard to do in Zoom when you're not in person. But so a couple of thoughts, just throw them out. You've got this client, she wants to majorly under offer. The home does need some repairs and it's sold as is. So you're not going to get absolutely anything out of it, even when you're under contract or trying to negotiate. It's not going to happen. So thoughts?
Well, one, you need to make sure, like, because I mean, if she is qualified for 175 or pre-approved for 175 or even more, then I think you have the conversation of like, how bad do you want it, basically, right? Like, be realistic. It's sold as is, which means they're not going to fix the roof.
Yep.
Probably not going to do anything. It is correctly priced. So 155, I mean, especially in our market right now, like, you're not going to get it.
Yeah. And I think kind of what you're alluding to is setting your expectation with your buyers before you're even going out and making offers, right? We're not in a market where we can underbid. We're not. You're not very likely to get less than listing. You know, have those conversations up front so they know. That way you're not going out and spending time, not wasting time, but spending time writing offers that are unrealistic. So set those expectations up front. Absolutely. Also at this point, there's a discrepancy in the listing price and in what she wants to offer. I always loop the lender in at this point, put them together so that they can explain and give actual numbers on what your mortgage would be at this dollar amount, and that dollar amount, so they can see what the difference is. And between those, you know, it's not likely as much of a gap as maybe they think. So always include the lender in the financial conversation so they can help counsel the client as well. Yeah, Tristan, go ahead.
Riley Condor had posted a meme in the Facebook page, and it was like pretty true. Like in this market right now, if you put a full price offer, it's considered a low ball.
Yeah, that is how it feels for sure. And it's frustrating. It can make everyone frustrated, but it is what it is. So it's absolutely true. Okay. So moving on, I just want to just briefly touch on those is all. Presenting the offer. Okay, a couple things, and I'll move through this pretty quickly because I think there are other important things. So call the other agent, let them know that an offer or counter offer is coming, and then invite them into the buying loop, which I think is like their version of dot loop, where they'll be able to view the contract. I always reach out to the agent in advance. I never send a blind offer. I always either call them. If I can't get a hold of them on a phone call, like I said, I'll send a text or an email, but I'm always very specific and list out the things in our contract that are positives, especially if you're only at listing price or maybe a little bit below. It's possible to get it done. And the best part or the best way to do that is going to be communication with the other agent from the get-go. So pay attention to nonverbal cues. We don't always negotiate face-to-face very often in real estate, but if you are in a situation where you're doing that, or you're even negotiating with your client, like we talked about at the beginning, just pay attention to the nonverbal cues that will help you understand what their position is, what their motivation is, all those things that we talked about before. Keep quiet once you present the offer. Sometimes letting the other person do most of the talking is the most powerful negotiation technique because of what they will reveal. That's very true. You can ask questions and just let the other agent tell you everything you need to know and then some. Stay calm and relaxed. I think that kind of speaks for itself. Focus on the customer's needs. It's your client, but isolate the objections of both sides and offer solutions. You know, it's really important right there. Part of being a good agent is really going to come down to offering solutions to your clients or to both sides even that will work and make the deal happen. If as an advisor to your clients, you're just telling them, here's the situation, here's the counteroffer, let me know what you think, you're not giving them any guidance. And if it's not exactly what they want to see, have those solutions prepared for them so that they can select something that will make that contract happen, because the goal is to keep that signed contract, right? So offer solutions, it's very important. Give your offer the best chance. Be confident and committed to the offer that you present. Avoid indicating to the other side if you believe it's a less than great offer. Absolutely, it's your duty as an agent to represent your client's best interest, but also just to relay what they want. And so even if it's a lowball offer, you know, you're required to present it to the other side, and don't give any other indication other than that. Okay. So this next section I think is really interesting. It's maybe not always going to impact the negotiation face-to-face with an agent, because like I said, we don't do a whole lot of that necessarily in real estate. But I think this is super important to know when talking about being professional, talking about negotiating with your clients, talking about getting listings, because you are negotiating with a client, a potential client, when you're getting, when you're taking a listing. So I think that this is actually a really important thing to be skilled at. And so I just want to go over a couple of these examples. And let me see, hopefully this has a marker. Oh, it has lots of markers. I want to block the screen, but okay. Can you guys see that? I know it's hard to see on Zoom, so we'll make sure we're listing everything out. But basically, we've got positive nonverbal cues and negative nonverbal cues. So give me a couple examples of what you think. I think most of us gravitate naturally towards negative ones because that's just what we talk about nonverbal cues a lot, but I found some really interesting, good, positive ones as well that I think are really beneficial, especially for new agents. So just throw out a couple, even on Zoom if you want to pitch in or leave something in the comments. So a couple positive ones. What do you say? Okay, yeah, absolutely. How your face looks. So smiling. Be creative. Think about what makes someone look positive without them saying it. This is really important. This is something I've put importance on is,
Sarah?
Yeah.
I was going to say, when people are leaning forward and they're really engaged in what you're saying, you can tell part of that by them leaning forward, or if they're really slouched, their posture's back in the chair, they're not as into it.
Absolutely. Is that Ariane?
Yep.
Hi. Okay.
Hey, girl.
She's right. Posture. We'll call it posture. So leaning forward or leaning into that person, being open. I mean, don't lean into their bubble. Don't get like right up in their face. That might be bad for the other person, but how you're standing and presenting yourself or sitting is very important. Staying open. And on the flip side of that, so like the exact opposite of that would be arms crossed. That's not what I wanted it to say. Okay. Crossed arms, leaning back in your chair, right? So you're leaning away from the communication. So I think those are perfect mirrors of each other. Yeah, not making eye contact, right? That's one of my biggest pet peeves. Eye contact is very important for showing that you're engaged and you're listening and you're capable of understanding what they're saying. So on the flip side of no eye contact is having eye contact, right? Because someone who will make eye contact with you, look you in the eyes and explain where they're coming from or explain what the offer is or talk to their client about their expectations, you look like you know what you're talking about. You are keeping their interest engaged. Eye contact is huge, really, really big. Tristan, do you have another one? Yeah, so engaging in eye contact, or even your facial expressions going back and forth, you know, nodding your head or using your arms as you're talking like I am. Initiating the interaction, so being the first one to talk. Oh, and that's what I was saying is I've put a lot of focus coming up, especially in having a good handshake. And it gets pointed out to me all the time. Being the first one to talk, initiating that and shaking your hand, which apparently is illegal now, but remember when it wasn't. Having a confident handshake, making eye contact, and being the first one to talk, you're automatically in a position of power, is what we call it. So you're in your power position. A couple other things. This one is actually really, really important. Staying attentive. This one is really a big deal these days. Be off your phone. When you're talking to somebody, you're making eye contact, you're having an important conversation, and they're on their cell phone, they're immediately checked out. Even if they're saying that they're listening, and I do that too, like I'll be talking to a friend, I'm like, I swear I'm listening to you, I promise. You really can't multitask as well as we think we can, or we tell ourselves that we can. Being off your phone not only allows you to just give them that full attention, but it shows respect to whomever you're talking with. When I'm sitting down with a client, I turn my phone off and I make a point to tell them that my phone is off. Giving them that importance, they're your priority, and staying off your phone is huge. Yes, Tristan.
If you're doing a showing where, like, you know, you're walking through with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the way that people walk through homes is really interesting. It does dictate their personality. So when you don't know the client, like you're meeting them for the first time, I'll typically say something like, how would you guys like to do this? Would you like me to walk with you and show you the home, or would you like to walk through yourself and talk with me after? So you can ask them what they prefer. But yeah, that's absolutely, you can read nonverbal cues while they're looking at a home too, for sure. Just a couple other negatives really quick. The look on your face that we kind of talked about, eye rolling. If you want to know or understand better what negative nonverbal cues are, just talk to a teenager. They'll give you all of them. Eye rolling, just be careful. You know, sometimes when you're talking to other people and you find something exhausting or stupid, it's very easy to roll your eyes without paying attention to it. I used to get grounded a lot in high school. Yeah, twiddling thumbs, or just like fidgeting. How about that? I'm sure it's pointless to be writing this because you can't read my handwriting, but you get the idea. Something that I found interesting when I was looking up nonverbal cues, I got really kind of fascinated by it, read into it. A power stance or power position, kind of like we talked about, being the first to initiate contact, shaking the hand, keeping eye contact. All of that will cumulatively come together and be your power stance, is what I referred to it as. Holding your ground and showing your power. Interestingly enough, the female power stance, it says, starts between 4 and 6 inches. And that's talking about like a standing, how you're standing apart, how your feet are standing. And men, their power point or their power stance starts at 8 inches. It's almost double. So think of how you're standing. Think of how someone's talking to you. Think about how they're holding their weight and how they're grounding themselves. No, how your feet are apart. Yeah, because you're grounded. You're showing your confidence. So hopefully you can see this on Zoom. I don't know, but they're basically saying, you know, this is a power stance. This is not, right? You see the difference, and you don't think about it until you see it in person. But even holding your hands behind your back is not a power stance, because it instinctively looks like you're hiding something or withholding something. So just interesting. I mean, it's 2020, we're all equals here, but you know, power stance is important in how you present yourself. So that was really interesting. Big eyes? Like, put on fake eyelashes. Okay. I think that those are some really good examples. Anyone else have anything else they want to throw in there about nonverbal cues? Okay, cool. How do you think understanding and using your cues will benefit you in negotiating an offer or negotiating with your client? I mean, it all basically comes down to your confidence. Are you confident or not? Yeah. Yeah, you're going to have to be extremely confident. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. If you have someone that you feel comfortable taking with you, yeah, absolutely. It does look good to have a teammate with you, because you're showing that there's more than just you that can show your value and can prove to the client how good you guys are at understanding your market and giving them the time and attention they'll need. So yeah, if you have someone you can trust. Well, I mean, like, don't pay an actor to go be a realtor, but yeah, I mean, yeah, ask. I mean, there's our Facebook page, our KDOB page. If you don't have a team, like, just find someone that you trust asking questions to. And there's always someone willing to help, for sure. Okay, so we'll go over these. So these tactics and counter tactics. These 3 tactics that they talk about have some importance, but they're kind of creepy. So the first tactic says that these are the 3 common. First one is nibbling, which is so creepy and should be renamed. Once your client has agreed on one major concession, the other party will start nibbling for additional smaller concessions. So basically what that's kind of indicating is, once you've opened yourself up because you've agreed to something large, a large concession or whatever it is, then you're giving the other party the idea that you're open to taking all these other hits because you went for the big one first right away, right? So that is pretty common. I mean, I really don't like how it's named, but stop nibbling from happening by nibbling back. That's what it says right there, Zoomers. Ask for concessions in a smart and concise way. If you do ask for the big kahuna, like Sam was talking about, you asked for $12,000 and they gave it to you, perfect. Like, you're in a great situation, but what this is saying is that you have the leverage now, because the other party has agreed to too much. So when you're thinking about going back and forth in traditional negotiating, I always think of yourself as like you're buying a used car, or you're talking to a car salesman. You're gonna go back and forth 8 times, right? And every time you hack away a little bit off that price, you get $500 off, and then you hack back and forth. That's what this is indicating. But if you walk into the car dealership and you're like, hey, I need $5,000 off that car, and they're like, no, we'll start at 500, right? And then you've given the indication already. So that's what nibbling is. All right, hot potato. Tristan, will you read hot potato?
The other party tries to pass a problem on to you. For example, the co-op agent tries to pass all closing costs to your client because their client can't afford them.
I found this really interesting because I actually do see and hear this quite a bit. Passing off a problem onto the other person is, I guess, lazy in some ways, but it also is an interesting tactic in the sense of, like, what this person is in this scenario. Hey, we can't afford it, so do it for us, or or the contract will go bad, or whatever, right? Passing the problem onto the other agent, and this is a perfect example. The client can't afford them. I hear that all the time in negotiations. My client can't afford it. So basically, what this is suggesting is, when you're passing that problem off to the other person and they're going to refuse to take that problem, which they should, have your solutions prepared to go back to your client and say, this is not going to work. They don't care that you don't have the money for your closing costs. So let's get creative on how to get you your closing costs. And there's different tactics for that, which if we had a much longer class, we could go into. But offering solutions, like we've talked about a few times in here, is going to be one of your best characteristics as a good agent, because you're going to have situations like this where you have a problem that you need to have a solution for, and having those prepared in advance, because they'll be standard to some extent, but having to work around. There's been times where I've called the lender and said, hey, listen, we're at this max amount. They really want this house. Is there anything you can do with your fees, or anything that how can you help us a little bit come down on those costs? There's ways to have good answers and solutions in advance, because you've used them in other tactics. So record and write down things that, as a new agent, you're experiencing in your contracts, and remember to use them as you move forward. So that's what I would do is, hey, the client can't afford it. It's going to go bad, right? Basically, it's an emotional tactic. It's playing on what you think you can get the other person to care about. It's manipulation. That's the word I'm looking for. It's emotional manipulation. In this market, you don't have the opportunity as much to do that because the seller could very well walk away and have another offer, or likely has backup offers already. But in a position where your client legitimately can't afford something, you shouldn't have put them there anyways and been making offers. But it's all an emotional manipulation tactic, like I said, to see who cares the most and what's the bottom line for both parties, right? So that's hot potato. The suggestion on here says, throw it back, test the validity, find out if the problem is real. So if I was the listing agent in that scenario, I would say, well, just ask the questions back. How did they get into this situation? Why don't they have closing costs? How about I reach out to the lender and ask some questions, whatever. You can come up with some different solutions for the other party as well. That's going to be a part of finding a win-win. So if they're throwing something on you, just ask those questions to really find out if it's legitimate or not before you agree to it, is what this is saying. Okay, good guy, bad guy. I mean, we've all done, you're familiar with this, the bad cop, good cop thing. There's really not a whole lot to talk about in here, except that that's a common tactics that's used. If you're being faced with that, the suggestion is call them out on their game. Say, hey, you're not playing good cop, bad cop, are you, right? And there's not a whole lot of scenarios I can imagine where you're dealing with like two agents at the same time, but so maybe this would apply more for your clients or whatever. But basically just calling them out, hey, we're not doing the good cop, bad cop thing, right? Because in my opinion, like the bad cop is the mark for this whole conversation. So we're just gonna, I'm gonna eliminate that tactic by making you both the bad cop. Does that make sense? So anything good and positive that the good cop is saying, you attribute to what the bad guy says to the good guy. I had that backwards, sorry. So anything that the bad guy says, just attribute it to the good cop. They're a partnership. They're somehow playing off of each other. So just call them out. There's no good guy, bad guy. There's just two bad guys. That's how I'm going to view this tactic. Does that make sense? I'd never heard that before, but it's a way to diffuse that tactic, is just kind of eliminate it. So that's good guy, bad guy. Any comments or questions or thoughts? No? Okay. So position, this is the last P. Positioning is moving both parties closer to each other until you have a full agreement, inching in until we get to where we want to be. So the first bullet point here, acknowledge and affirm your common ground where the buyer and seller are in agreement and at the same position. Then identify positions that can be easily adjusted and which are set in focus. So for example, you need to ask for a couple of repairs. Maybe they're a little bit hefty. So you call the listing agent if you're representing the buyer. Hey, we've done great so far. We've agreed at the same price. We've got our closing dates locked down. This is awesome. We're right on track. The only hiccup we might have is we need a couple of these repairs. So acknowledging and pointing out the good first, and then bringing in the negative. It's not necessarily negative, but bringing in what you have to negotiate for after. So staying positive, bringing that up first. Ask what and how questions to better understand the other party's values and why certain things are important to them. For example, if you represent the seller, they want to close in 30 days and a buyer wants to close within 60 days, you should ask Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you're requesting 30-day closing. What is important about those 30 days? Seek to understand, then be understood. Explain to them why that's not necessarily beneficial, or if it is beneficial. Asking. Okay. If your client, these are just really broad examples in here. Yeah, it's just a very broad example. But if one party or the other wanted a longer than normal or longer than average closing, how would you address that, and why is it important to you? And there's a scenario that we can talk about that will come up. But it does say, I think this is very important, if your client becomes defensive, you should explain or can explain, my goal is to let the buyer know why this is important to you. Again, real estate is an emotionally charged transaction for a lot of people. If your client is defensive, just explain, I need to understand your positioning so I can explain to the buyer. You're kind of hot potatoing that to the buyer, like, hey, the buyer needs to understand in order to make this contract happen. So that was pretty sharp. Any comments or questions?
Hey, Sarah, this is Jenna. I have one again.
Hey, Jenna.
So one thing, I'm in a blended family, and so we do family therapy. And one thing the therapist said to me that I always keep in mind is, if somebody feels understood, it will take the fight right out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the other thing that I learned is somebody that asks the questions drives the conversation. So those two things I keep in mind all the time. Just, I need to make sure, even though somebody's being a jerk, that they know that I understand, and that fight should just completely just go out of them, and we can have a conversation after that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that applies to, like her example, personal relationships, as well as it does with business relationships. You're taking the fight out of it and not giving any energy to it by just listening and wanting to understand where they're coming from, because everyone is upset or angry for a reason. And understanding what that reason is will eliminate a lot of that emotion. So really, thank you, Jenna. Positioning is a process that sometimes requires you to come back to the negotiating table more than once. Sometimes several counteroffers will happen and go back and forth. Know when to walk away. Sometimes the other side will refuse to give your clients any wins. Knowing how and when to walk away. I think that in this, the way that this is worded is just fine, know when to walk away, but have your clients be the one to make that decision, okay? Don't make decisions for your client. That will come back on you. So a couple of things that you can say to your client to understand is, at what point do you feel like you're no longer getting a good deal? Is it the repairs? Is it the purchase price? Where are you at? Because then you can take that information and work around it and give them solutions, all based on what you know that they need, right? At what point do you feel like you're not getting a good deal? In a deal, the client needs to feel like they're in control. They need to feel like they're driving it, because it is their purchase. You're their advisor, you're their counselor. So offer a couple of different solutions or options and let them select what they want to go with, okay? All right, so how's this doing? Like a little bit of role-playing stuff, which we love to do, right guys? Role-playing. But instead, I mean, we're getting close on time, so I think we'll just read through some of the scenarios, and then people can throw out suggestions if they have them. But hypothetically, you know, if you're going back and forth between the two of you in role-playing, this is the scenario you would be discussing. Property has 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, and is listed at $350 in a well-established neighborhood. The house requires new carpeting throughout the first floor and a garage door opener. 3 offers have been made, but we're well below asking price, or we're all below. So the buyer's agent role and then the listing agent, we're going to separate them. Your buyers are making an offer of $340 for the house. They've been pre-approved. The buyers would like to close in the shortest time possible, since they are moving out of state and need a home for their family. Since they are leaving appliances in their current home, they would also like to take the appliances. They would like the appliances to stay. The listing agent side of things, your sellers have raised their family in the house that you are selling and have many friends and family in the area. Since the children are now grown, they no longer need the amount of space in their current home and have purchased a home in Florida. Very common thing you're going to deal with is downsizing. They would like to give all of their appliances to their daughter, who has just gone through a divorce. They will not be moving until they've sold their current house, and although they would like to get to Florida as soon as possible, they are ready to stand their ground regarding price. Okay, so does everyone understand the scenario?
The buyers want the appliances, and the sellers are trying to give them to their daughter.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Yep. So the buyer and the seller. The buyer wants the appliances. What else? Yep. What else is really important in that buyer agent role that it says really important to timelines? That will happen a lot. What's in there? Because they are moving from out of state. Yep. So they're moving into the state, and that gives you complications in getting moved out of your state, traveling from wherever you're coming from, getting into your new property. If the timelines don't align, they could be staying in a rental or a hotel until their home is ready. So this situation will come up. You need to know how to give your clients good advice. So moving from out of state. So that's one of those things that's going to be a deal breaker for them, right? When they can get into their home. Okay, and then on the seller's side, the most important things to them are the price. Hopefully you can see this. And they want to give their appliances to their daughter because of what? Why do they want to give their appliances to the daughter? But why do they want to give them to their daughter specifically? because she just went through a divorce. So what do we know already? That we have an emotionally charged decision. They want to give their appliances because they love their daughter and she just went through a hard divorce. So this is one of those things that you need to understand their positioning, because your buyers need new appliances, but their daughter is someone that they love and they want to have their appliances. So now you're starting to see where they're coming from and why, right? And this makes it a lot easier when you're working together as agents, because you can find common ground and make solutions and suggestions to both parties, right? Okay, what else? And they're not going to move. They already have a home, so they're not worried about that, but they're not moving until they sell their home, which is going to be tricky because of what? Your buyers are coming in from out of state, okay? So likely there's going to be a discrepancy in the timelines. So a couple of ideas. This is where, instead of role playing, just throw out a couple of thoughts or ideas you might have. There's no right, there's no wrong from Zoom. If you'll pitch in too, that would be great. Couple of thoughts on how you would handle this if you were the buyer's agent. Let's start there. And these are just ideas, so there's no wrong answer, seriously. Shout it out. Anyone? Class isn't fun without participation.
Just make an offer on the appliances.
Yep, absolutely. If it's really important to your buyer that they have those, you can. Yeah, you can offer to purchase them, because you're telling the seller, instead of leaving them for free, how about I give you some money for them so that they could maybe turn around and do what? Buy appliances for their daughter, right? That's offering a solution. Hey, we need those appliances to stay. We're moving in from out of state. It's a pain to move them. Instead of buying new ones, how about we just give you $1,000 for your appliances? And then as the agent, you could say, hey, maybe they can use that $1,000 to buy, or to give their daughter to buy new appliances, right? That's giving everyone a win, because they get what they need, and the seller can still give their daughter something where maybe she even gets to pick it, right? You're looking at solutions and pitching it in the most positive way possible. So yeah, that's a great one. Was someone coming in on Zoom to say something?
Hi, this is Spencer. I have a response. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. So the concept that you're talking about is a wonderful one in understanding how other people feel, especially when it's an emotionally charged issue. Mm-hmm. In a terrific book called Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss goes into what he calls knowing somebody else's religion. Now, it's not talking about religious beliefs, but it knows it's to understand what other people are prodded by or motivated by. Mm-hmm. And in this situation, when people want to hang on to those items, to give them that incentive that you're talking about is vital. And in this situation, depending on if the sellers are going to go through financing, then they can go through Keller Mortgage, which will give them $1,000 in credit during closing, in which case they can purchase these items for about $1,000, depending on their newness and condition, and then they can get that in cash back in the closing if they need to. If they don't need to go into to get a loan, then there's obviously other ways that you can find that ghost $1,000, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect example of finding a creative solution to present to your buyer before you even get a no, right? Before we even start poking, because we know we're offering $10,000 less. So before we poke the bear and ask for the appliances too, let's look at all of our solutions and being creative like that. Like Spencer just said, knowing your tools and your resources and how you can benefit your client is huge. It is what you offer with value as an agent. Hey, you guys are pre-approved. I know that you've done that process. But if you do go with Keller Mortgage, right now they're giving $1,000 back. What if you did that and you could use your $1,000 to buy your appliances? Perfect example of providing solutions in advance. Now, if you were representing the listing agent, let's just take a couple thoughts really quick. If you were handling this on the selling side, what suggestions could you make to your client to help the transaction go smoothly should they accept this $10,000 under asking offer? Because most likely you're offering $10,000 less. They have activity on the property and they want your appliances. At least right now in this market, they're not even looking at your offer. But hypothetically, how could you help your seller understand, or how could you keep this together cohesively? It's a little trickier on this side, but Yeah, Tristan has a question. What's up?
So how come appliances can be included in the REPC and they don't need their separate bill of sale?
That's because you're not selling it, I guess. I mean, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, when they are in the REPC, you want them in there so everything's written down and documented in Word. But appliances are kind of one of those things, like you can't remove a stove, right? So it's a fixed. The fridge, not necessarily fixed. Some people might not want to go to the effort of taking it, or they want to get a new one, but it can be moved. So I think it really just comes down to the convenience of your client, but that's a really, really good question.
And
no, it's okay. You're good.
When you're asking for certain appliances to be included in the other section, is that where you write them down?
Yes.
And that would be like, hey, we're asking for this in the offer.
Yep. And then right underneath that also, there is, I wish I had it pulled up, but it says there are other items subject to sale, something like that, where that will have a separate bill of sale. It does say that right in the REPC, so you can write that into there. And then you do have to actually write a separate bill of sale, and title can help you do that also. No, there's no. So it's like, yeah, like an actual, like you're providing a receipt. Yep. Yeah. And my title company has helped me do that a few times. So yeah, that's a really good question. Meridian Title. I absolutely love them. Happy to introduce you to them. They've got a couple different offices. There's one in Lehigh that I primarily go to. There's one in Murray. The title officer has been an agent. He's been a broker. He's all over the place. So he gives me lots of advice and help when I need it, and is very responsive and has never had a flaw or fluke come up. So he's great. Okay, back to the listing agent role. A couple things. Really, when it comes down to if they're going to accept this offer, they're in a contract. Now we have a position where we have to work this out for both people. In my opinion, the conversation I would have with the listing agent, or I'm sorry, with their clients, is really what is more important, the price or the moving timeline. These people are coming in from out of state. If you're absolutely not flexible on your timeline, you're not going anywhere, let's not even accept this offer. Let's look at other offers if you have them. So really just, again, understanding their motivation and why. So saying, you already have this home in Florida. Why not, let's make this timeline smooth. You can already move there. You can be out in their timeline, and it's a win-win, right? There's other options. If someone, if these guys need to close on this home and move into state, and these guys aren't ready to go, or on the flip side, these guys have to move fast because they're coming in from out of state. There's ways to work possession, or allowing the sellers to stay in the property until they need to leave, or they've got their timelines coinciding. So you can do delayed possession, which you can write into the contract, basically saying these guys are going to close. You're going to have your settlement date, and then your clients, the sellers, can stay in the home for up to 72 hours, and you can actually list in the REPC whether it's hours or days after the contract. So you can do delayed possession. You can also do something that's called rent back. I don't know that this scenario necessarily applies, but if your seller has to stay for an extended period of time, they could close on the deal. They could rent the home from the buyers, because now the buyers own it. So you come up with a reasonable rent, a daily rent, and then they would pay that back to the buyer. The buyer can use that rent to pay for their hotel stay, right? That's a good solution as long as they're willing to stay in a hotel. We all know there's hotels that you can find that have kitchens and separate rooms, right? So you could make that suggestion if the timelines really came down to the nitty gritty. Let's do a rent back, and then you guys can have some cash flow coming in to stay where you need to stay or do whatever you need to do. Okay. We're getting down to 15 minutes. So let me just see here what else we got to go through. Okay. So there's one more scenario, and we'll just kind of talk about a couple of those things, and we'll just wrap up. In this scenario, if you're the buyer or the buyer's agent, your client has found a house that they love in a neighborhood they want. It's at the top of their price range, but does need some work updating the kitchen and the master bedroom. Your client makes an offer on the property, and the seller's agent says, I must warn you that we have several offers and your offer is pretty low. Okay, so we know the things that are important to the buyer. The neighborhood is great. It's in good condition. What did it say? It's at the top of their price range and it needs some updating. But also they have other offers, okay? Utah right now, you just say thank you, have a nice day, move on. Okay, the seller though, your sellers need to move within 45 days due to a job transfer. So what do we already know? So if they're moving because of a job transfer, it's likely a significant distance, right? It's going to be highly emotional. They're moving, they're starting something new, which is exciting, but they're also leaving behind their home and their life that they had there. So you already have a flag. You're aware the house needs updating, but the sellers don't see it as a need because the house was just fine for them. That will happen too. They don't think it needs updating. Like, we like avocado green appliances. What do you mean? Okay. And they've got multiple offers on the same side. Okay. So what would you suggest to your client in this scenario? Or what are some solutions that you can come up with for your client? In the neighborhood they want, but it's at the top of their price range and it needs updating. And it has multiple offers. Go ahead. Oh, you're thinking about it. You're just not sure yet. One thing, I mean, we're looking for win-wins, right, between contracts. But in this scenario, with you needing to be the advocate for your client and getting them what they need, maybe this isn't the best property for them.
Yeah, that's possible as well. One advantage you may have as a buyer is that you can close quickly. So the job transfer is coming right up, and so you may be able to offer that.
Sure.
You may not say anything about updates and suggest to your client that you just do like a live-in rehab.
Yeah. And what do you ask your client at that point? You brought it up earlier.
How important is this to
How
you?
important is this to you? Yeah. Is replacing a $250 avocado green stove, where you could buy one on KSL for, $250, is that your deal breaker? Perfect, thing to ask your clients. Yeah. Go ahead.
Another one is just like what loan they're using, or if they're using hard cash. If they're using hard cash, you can go to the seller and be like, hey, we're offering full cash offer. We can close in a week.
Yep. Cash is king, right? With the biggest benefit being a very fast close. So,
and with that, you could also, some people, if they want a fast close and you offer a cash offer that's a little less than the other offers, some people will take that. Just because it's cash, you're going to close quickly. And then with the buyer, you're saving some money to update.
Yeah, very true. Cash, yes, that's going to give you the advantage for sure. If they are not in a position where they can pay for cash, I would get on the phone with the lender and say, how qualified are these guys, which you should know before, but how quickly can you do a close? Right now, USDA and FHA are very difficult to get done quickly, probably not an option. So just know your client, know the situation, but ask that lender, how quickly can you do this? So you write it into the offer that you can do it quickly. The other thing for your buyer, when you're talking about trying to get to a win-win without pressuring them into something, there's only one thing on here that really cannot ever change. And that's the location. And people say in real estate, location is everything, location, location, location. So in talking to your client about what's important and what's not, it needs a little updating. It said it needs a few updates. I mean, you're going to peel wallpaper, or are you going to leave your neighborhood? The neighborhood will always, be here. This is the location you want to be in. What are your priorities, right?
Hey, Sarah.
Yes.
Quick question on the lending side. So let's say you have a cash buyer. How, so they wouldn't need lending then. Right. How would you have like a pre-approval letter? What would that look like?
So typically what you just have to do is provide proof of funds. So send a bank statement. You don't have to, show all the charges, but get a bank statement stating what the balance of their account is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in terms of being the seller, any ideas or thoughts really quickly on how to make this a win-win when you're giving advice or counsel to your client?
It may not be the best option for them either if they have other offers.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
they're firm on price.
Yeah.
And if other people don't care about updates,
Yeah.
then you may get a better offer.
Yep. One thing you can do, again, we talked about this earlier, asking broad questions. So if you were the buyer's agent calling the seller or whatever and saying, how are the other offer, how good are the other offers, right? I mean, you can ask, what are the other offers? They shouldn't tell you, but you know, you can get a lot out of some people. And then going, you know, looking at this side of it, what is your priority? That's always really going to be what it comes down to, the motivation, like we've talked about several times. In this particular scenario, they're moving out of state to take a job. So we know that they're in a stressful position already, right? They've got a timeline in their mind that is absolutely the most important thing, or if it is the most important thing, I should say. So this timeline being important is what they need to watch for in an offer instead of necessarily the price or the updating, right? How quickly can we get this done? Or this could be saying, we're moving in 45 days. We need to stay in our house for 45 days. And then how do you leverage that as the buyer's agent? Okay, you guys need to stay in your home. We don't. We live locally. So let's close, give them a good settlement date. So these guys get the cash in their account and they can deal with moving on and they can stay in there for the last 5 days of the contract or 15 days or whatever the number is, right? So you can leverage it on both sides for sure. In terms of updates, you know, that's not necessarily important to these guys. It just doesn't need to happen. They're probably not going to do any updating if they're selling their house. In terms of multiple offers, just making sure that your seller sees, knows, and understands the other terms besides price that are coming through in the offer. So I think that wraps up that scenario. Does anyone have any questions on Zoom or any comments or anything before we just kind of go right back over what we were talking about and finish up? Okay, cool. Well, our objective and our goal today was to learn some tips and tricks and the 3 Ps, which are, does anyone remember them? Yeah, prepare, yep, present, and position. Yeah, absolutely. Understanding those things, listening. I mean, my biggest takeaway from reading through this material and teaching it again was just listening in negotiation, seek to understand the other side, seek first to understand, then be understood, and understand where both parties are coming from, what your client's motivations and priorities are. And there really is almost always a solution for everything, for every scenario. All right, okay. That wraps it up.
Thank you.
You're welcome. No idea how to turn this thing off. I know, but nothing looks like a switch. Oh yeah, it is. That's tight.